Good morning. We will continue with our discussion on world religions. Previous discussion was on different goals of religions. This morning I will be discussing different paths to achieve these goals. So when we discuss religions, one aspect very important is what do we try to achieve by following religion. Now this is what I mean by goal. Now we have to remember when we look at historically, in the primitive religions, we cannot talk about of course we can talk about goals and paths in a different manner. The goal was simple, namely to please gods. For this purpose, various rites and rituals, dance and offering were performed. At times, sacrifice, animal or even human sacrifice was performed. The expected result or goal was this worldly gains, such as protection of one's family, animals, crops, etc., and prosperity, or revenge, victory in the war, were some other goals. Now you can see that when you look at the primitive religion, the goals were simple. And also what they did were also you can in a way say simple things like different rites and rituals, performing dance and things like that. Now at the beginning in our earlier discussions we know that the origin of religion basically in the primitive societies came from their day-to-day fears and the challenges to cope with nature and that sort of things. What's happening? Okay. Yeah, I will do that. You don't hear, yeah.
It's not clear, Prof.
Okay. Should be clear now, okay. Sorry for that. I forgot it. So then the sacrifice was part of that. And then what they expected was very mundane things like, their daily protection, the protection in their life, protection from natural elements, disasters, and then snakes, animals, and things like that. And then prosperity, revenge, victory in the war, fights with different groups. So the life was in a way, in political science, the literature, they use these words, life was nasty, brutal and short. So, life was nasty and then brutal and also short. And within that life, people performed rites and rituals and dancing and things like that just to please gods. What I'm trying to tell you is this. The goals in a more developed sense is a part of the developed religion, okay? It is not the part of the primitive religions. So today we are not going to discuss how the rites and rituals were performed in primitive religion. Of course, when we next talk about Vedic religion, rites and rituals come in a very big manner. We will refer to it shortly. But basically, the goals were at this stage were pretty simple goals, and they did simple things. However, the goal of a religion in a developed sense belongs to developed religion, or what we describe as axial religion. when religion has particularly they developed the concept of salvation or liberation. Now these are the concepts of developed religion. Now when we go on discussing this topic, you will see that the concept of salvation through God, the concept of God is highly complex issue for the more than 1,000 years. This concept has been developed. So these things you can see in the developed religion. However, in the primitive religion, we see simple things and as goals. But what we really consider to be goals are more developed. Ultimately, what do you expect by following a religion? So the key feature is that it goes beyond your present life. You expect something afterlife. Now, in some religions, they believed in a series of afterlife, like the Buddhist and Indian concept of samsara. And in some other religions, particularly if you take the theistic religions, God-centered religions, they believed in one life after the death. Okay, one life after the death. So after death there will be one life. In that life, of course, you will be either judged to go to heaven or to hell. So in whatever manner, either one life or many life, this developed religion is associated with more than one life. And also something life after death. Now in the primitive religion you can see not much about the life after death. They are more worried about within this life, ordinary things. But in the developed religion it's different. Now when it comes to the Vedic religion, sacrifice was practiced. What began as a simple act of offering food to gods gradually became very complex and elaborate activity involving large amounts of grain and killing many animals. Now, I said that rites and rituals, offerings were a part of primitive religion. Actually, it's true. It started as a part of primitive religion. But Indian Vedic religion is a good example. With the developed religion, you can see very developed and elaborate practice of sacrifice. So what began as a simple act of offering food to gods. Now in the Indian context, the yajna, or what we call yaga or yajna, started as a simple act. It seems that it started as a simple act, the kind of family act. For example, the housewife will offer some ghee or some oil to the morning fire. Now fire is considered to be God, and then to begin with you pour some ghee to fire, thinking that you are really make offering to the fire god. But subsequently, we know that this fire god practice really became an elaborate practice, with a lot of rites and rituals associated with that, and then Brahmins sitting around and chanting. So, it is not that simple act. It grew up to be very complex. Now, even today, in India, you find these forms of sacrifice, and then particularly fire sacrifice. You can see that when the rituals are going on, fire is burning. This fire keeps on burning all throughout. So offering it fuel, ghee, and other things, and that's a part of the ritual. So it goes on. So you can see that something that started as a very simple thing has become a very complex thing. And then I remember several years ago when there was famine and very bad weather in India, some religious groups organized a huge yajna, sacrifice, involving a lot of grains and food items. This is a long time ago story. To my memory, it was Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister. She stopped that because she said that people are suffering from lack of food. So why do you have to have this huge sacrifice, offering this amount of large amounts of food? So she stopped that. And I remember those days it became a very controversial issue. But you can see that, yajna has become really a huge, complex affair that has to be performed by religious experts. So no longer ordinary people can do that. You have to have religious experts to do that. Okay. Now, this is also something with many religions. Even in Buddhism, we can see that sometimes very ordinary things become some kind of expert work. Suppose, somebody wants to invite monks to their house. There can be some people who give instructions, how to do that. So, it becomes then later it becomes a part of the ritual. You have to get these experts to come and, advise you how to do that. That sort of thing. So gradually things like that develop. Now, in the Vedic tradition, sacrifice involved the service of 4 experts named Hotru, one who invites gods to the sacrificial ground, Udgatru, one who sang hymns in praise of gods, Advaryu, one who performed offering, and Brahman, the overall director of the sacrifice. So here you can see something interesting because subsequently, gradually, this very simple sacrificial act became something very complex, needing the expert guidance. So expert guidance in the sense, the literature dealing with Veda, particularly the Brahmana literature, deals with how to perform a sacrifice properly. So directions, which directions, what to offer to which gods, and all these things were minutely performed, discussed and performed. So it required expertise. Now, for example, a king or some rich person want to perform a yajna, he has to get the service of these people. Now, the service of these people don't come for free. You have to offer many offerings to them, like the cattle, grain, and So it becomes some kind of expert religious activity which involves, a lot of material exchange of lot of material things. Now, in the Buddhist literature, we know that it's referred to this kind of activities and how Brahmins lived on this. So huge yaga becomes a very organized, very expensive affair, and also it improves the material condition of the Brahmins. Okay, so these 4 people, it's very interesting. If you look at the Vedas, Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda. Of course, Atharvan Veda came subsequently. These 3 Vedas are connected to these 3 main acts of yajna. So Rig Veda is calling gods, so different gods in the Rig Veda. And then Samaveda is basically what you sing in praise of gods, Samaveda. And then Yajur, Sama, and then Yajurveda. Yajurveda also connected to the performance of yaga, particularly with the Advaryu. So you can see 3 Vedas were really shaped according to this sacrificial act. Now, in the Indian religion, this sacrificial act became very important to the extent that they believed that if you perform sacrifice correctly and properly and keep gods pleased, then only the universe will function properly. So, in other words, they connected the yajna to what is called rita in the Vedic tradition. So, you have yajna, and then you have what is called rita. Rita means something like order of the world. Rita means order of the world. Order you see in the world, like sun rises in the morning and then sets in the evening, and then moon rises, and then seasons come, and then planets go in their orbits. So in this manner, if you look at the universe world, you can see some kind of pattern. Now, they believed that at some point they believed that this pattern was, to this pattern Varuna, God Varuna was responsible, because he looks after. Now if you look at the planetary motion, like Earth goes its orbit, Sun goes its orbit, they don't clash with each other. So the explanation was, today we think that it is because due to gravitational force, but of course those days they did not know about it. They thought that this orderliness of the universe is something to which something gods are responsible. And then at some point they also thought that human contribution to this order is yajna. So when you perform yajna properly and please gods, and then of course rita, the world order, will be going smoothly. Earlier I referred to this yajna some people tried to do when there was a famine and a drought. Again you can see the connection. Famine, droughts, and as a result of that famine come when you don't get the rain, right? So the idea was that rain is, again, the god is responsible for rain. So if gods are not pleased, then world doesn't function. The system of the world does not function if the gods are not free. Now, so the act of yajna was connected to this whole process. In other words, what I'm saying is, although sacrifice was a pretty simple thing, although it was in very primitive religions, you can see that it became a part of even the very developed religion, okay? And then it became a very important aspect. Now, when you see the Buddhist literature, you know that there is a substantial critique of this kind of sacrifices. And then in some discourses in the Brahmajala Sutta, particularly in the Kutadanta Sutta, you have Buddha showing how bloodless sacrifice, because there were hundreds of animals brought in for this sacrifice to be killed. And even now, I think in Nepal and some other parts of Hindu religious practice, animal sacrifice takes place in hundreds of animals are being slaughtered. Now, Buddha's intervention here, and then Buddha showed how bloodless, sacrifice can perform without, the blood. But this, idea is, sacrificing somebody's life to please gods, so that in return you get something, is again a very primitive idea. Okay, very primitive idea. It comes from, in order to gain life, you have to sacrifice a life. Of course, you can't sacrifice human life like that. You get animal life to sacrifice. So So you can see some of these aspects, interestingly evolving through religion. And in the developed Hindu religion, the animal sacrifice was part of that. And then also, the Buddhist critique of that. Anyhow, the idea is that the sacrifice was needed. Now, what did they expect from sacrifice? Of course, they expected worldly gains. For example, kings performed sacrifices, say, before they go for a war, and also after they win the war. You can see that, the blessings were expected. And after the death, of course, Hindus believed in the concept of sansara. So after the death, in the sansara, to be born in good places. So this worldly and otherworldly ideas, expectations were connected with sacrifice. Okay, so but still we can see that this is not related to, not connected to moksha. It's not connected to moksha. It is connected to the swarga, the heaven, or these worldly expectations. However, in Hinduism, two paths, the path of action, karma marga, and the path of knowledge, jnana marga, are mentioned as the path. Now, when it we come to this karma marga and jnana marga, I think we are dealing with something little different. Because the idea was that actually in the Hindu or the Brahmanic religion, gradually they developed a group of Brahmins who went away from sacrifice and yajna and that sort of practice. They moved away from that and went into contemplative practice. Now this contemplative practice is reported in what is called Aranyaka and also Upanishad literature. If you take the Brahmanic literature, you have Aranyaka and Upanishad. Aranyaka means Aranya, what was developed in the forest. And then Upanishad, the very important secret doctrine they developed. So, so within the Brahmana tradition itself, there were groups of people who went into the contemplative tradition. Okay, so those people who went to contemplative tradition, and then there was a group in the city associated with villages who were engaged in what is called yajna and sacrifice. Okay, so these two traditions, actually, in a way, you can say one is a noisy tradition. Other is the silent tradition. Okay, so there was a noisy tradition, in the sense tradition with noise, the chanting of Veda, and then there was the other tradition that was associated with contemplation. Okay, so interestingly, this noisy tradition was incorporated into the moksha. Now, how they incorporated the noisy tradition into moksha? Moksha is the what is called karma marga. Karma means action. Marga means path. So, subsequently, it was conceptualized that moksha can be attained two ways. Moksha can be attained by doing things, and moksha can be attained by contemplation. Now, this division is a result of an effort to incorporate Vedic yajna tradition into the moksha ideal. Can you see the point? Because, the yajna performing people were really following what is called karma marga, the path of action. Now, path of action doesn't necessarily mean the yajna. You can interpret it in a broad manner. Now today, of course, this concept, for example, interpreted in the very broad manner. So according to the modern interpretation, karma marga is not really necessarily yajna, but karma marga is any kind of social service. What we call social service today, social activism today is karma marga. So according to new interpretation, people claim that karma marga is the social service, work, through service, through doing things, you also approach God, or also you approach moksha. Now this is a new interpretation, but this started with not that kind of social service, but generally action. What is meant by action initially was yajna. So you can see how yajna was incorporated into the scheme of moksha. Initially, yajna was started for ordinary daily life, the realities. But here you can see through karma marga, path of action, it is being incorporated into the soteriological goal. Now, interestingly, when you look at the jnana marga, it is very important for us to understand jnana marga is the path of knowledge. Now, when we come to Buddhism, also we see this aspect, although Buddhists don't use the word jnana marga, but the concept is very much there. So in the Upanishadic tradition, what they develop is what is called jnana marga. By this time, in the Upanishadic tradition, the concept was that you achieve liberation through knowledge. So knowledge as the means. Okay. Now in the Upanishadic tradition, this whole exercise is called Adhyatma Vidya. This exercise is called Adhyatma Vidya. Adhyatma means Adhi-atma. Adhyatma. So Adhyatma means your inner agency. Of course, Buddhism would not put in that way, but Adhyatma, the concept of Atma. It's the same thing, Adhyatma, Adhi-atma. So Adhyatma Vidya means knowledge of inner essence, or knowledge of Atman, Adhyatma, knowledge of Atman, knowledge of inner essence. So this whole exercise was called Adhyatma Vidya, and accordingly Upanishadic thinking was, they said, Atmanang Vidhi. Atmanang Vidhi. So we can say, know thyself. Or in other words, Atmanang Vidhi means know yourself, know your Atma. Now this statement is something very important. Ultimately, Brahmanic religious tradition, through gods, through yajna, and having gone through all these things, finally, for the liberation, where does it come to? It comes to oneself, to the person. I mean, in other words, you go around the entire world and then finally you coming back to yourself in order to find salvation. This is something very, very important, because from this respect, of course, Buddhism and Brahmanic religion are different, but in this respect, you can see that Buddhism also come very close to this category. Actually, historically, Buddhism belongs into middle Upanishadic period. That means the very developed period of Upanishadic tradition. Now, in this developed period of Upanishadic tradition, Buddhist concept comes from very close to this, because the whole idea was you achieve liberation according to Buddhism also by knowledge, right? Samma jnana, samma vimutti. By you first follow the Eightfold Path. By following the Eightfold Path, you get Samma Jnana, and then from Samma Jnana, you get Vimutti. So you can see from Jnana to Vimutti. Now the same thing, Atmanang Viddhi, know thyself. A very similar statement is found in the Buddhist literature to these young the young princes. They were looking for one of their companion women who got lost. And then to them, Buddha said, Attanang gavesayyatha. Right? Attanang gavesayyatha. It's interesting. Atmanang viddhi and Attanang gavesayyatha seem to be very close. Okay? When Buddha said Attanang gavesayyatha, we can't interpret this as saying you look for your Atma or something. But simply Attanang gavesayyatha means don't look into other things, but you look into your inner. So Attanang gavesayyatha. Look for yourself. Find yourself. Discover yourself. Okay. So on the one hand, we have in the Hindu tradition, Atmanang Viddhi. Know your Atma. Because ultimately, knowledge of Atma is the liberating knowledge. Interestingly, according to Buddhism, knowledge that there is no Atma is the liberating knowledge. Okay? Isn't it the difference? In Brahmanism, knowledge of your Atma is the liberating knowledge. In Buddhism, knowledge that there is no Atma, Anatma. Okay? But you can see it is very subtle shift from one to the other. Brahmana religion saying, know your Atma. So Buddhism saying, know that there is no Atma, something like that. But anyhow, the important focal point and the important connection is knowledge. Okay? Knowledge. And the same thing is jnana from vimutti. In the discourses like Mahachattarisaka, we have the statement Atthanga samannagato sekho, dasanga samannagato araha. Right? What is the meaning of that? Sekha has 8. Atthanga samannagato sekho. Sekha is one who is still training, right? Sekha, aseka. Dasanga samannagato araha. The arahant has 10. The Sekha has 8 means Sekha has eightfold path. He is still treading the path. Dasanga samannagato araha means when you become an arahant, you have additionally 2 things. What are the 2 things? Samma jnana, samma vimutti. In other words, from Noble Eightfold Path is only the path. Fruit is, from following the path, you get knowledge. From knowledge, you get liberation. So what I am trying to show you is this. We are talking about the paths of different to achieve different goals. I am not going to talk much about Nirvana or Eightfold Path to you because you know it. But what I am trying to show you is historically how these similar ideas were developed in the Indian tradition. Okay. So this is called in the Vedic Hindu religion today. This is called Jnana Marga, the path of the knowledge. Actually, they conceptualize this as a goal can be achieved through 2 ways. One way is, you do things. You are not a reflecting man. You are a person doing things in the society. So, but that through that doing, you please God and, you approach God. That was one thing. The other thing is you are not really doing things or performing yajnas in the society, but you are a contemplator, but through contemplation you realize God. So you can see these two things are very interesting. In a way, historically, you can see also how the two paths were kind of connected. In other words, those who engage in yajna were also incorporated into the mainstream soteriological moksha path. Okay? As I said earlier, today in the modern Indian philosophy, Hindu philosophy, they interpret karma marga differently. According to them, karma marga doesn't mean yajna, but karma marga means social service. Karma marga means social service. You serve the people, you help people, you engage in social work. So through such activities, you achieve liberation. Now, it is very interesting. When you look at the Hindu tradition, they conceptualize this as karma marga and jnana marga. Now, when you look at the Buddhist tradition also, you see somewhat, this kind of thing. So when you see the ideas, you must be able to connect to your own tradition. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, we have Buddhist monks, if you take monks, who are in the cities, who are in the villages, who are running temples, doing things, building temples, building constructions, running colleges, and, going to places, who are doing social service, right? And then there are other monks who are living in the forest, who are meditating, who are not doing anything. Now, what is this? How are we to understand? Isn't it something like karma marga and jnana marga? Although it has not been conceptualized in that manner, but we can see that there were always, these two groups, although not officially divided. A monk who is doing buildings and teaching and all that, go to his room in the night and meditate. There is no problem about that. So it is not sharp defined. But we can see that, some kind of distinction. Actually, in some countries, like in some Buddhist societies, like in Korean, the Mahayana Buddhist society, there were actually some monks who were really, they were not very much into religious practice. They were basically running the temples. So they were administrators. So you had administrators, you have scholars, and then you had meditators. In some Buddhist traditions, it was more or less accepted. But in the Theravada tradition, we can see that sharp division is not made. Even though sharp division is not made, you can see the groups of people lining up to these kind of practices. So some are now engaged more in social activities. Now, if we have never debated this, but if somebody says you have to only meditate to attain nirvana, doing these things you will not attain nirvana, so what should we say? Actually, in the Buddhist tradition, we have had this gramavasi, aranyavasi. Some monks were living in the village and the cities with people, and then others were living in aranya. But, the distinction was not very sharp because roles can crisscross. So in the Buddhist tradition, this was, at least in the Theravada tradition, this distinction was not really formally made. But you can think about it. It was not formally made, but it was existent. In Sri Lanka, there is Sri Lankan history, there is a very interesting story about two monks. They were friends. One was living in the village, and then other one was living in the forest. Okay, so then two friendly monks. So one day this monk from the village was visiting his friend in the forest. Okay, And then he went there, and he went there in the evening. So he thought that he will get something too, because he is, traveling. So in the Aranya, he will get something to drink, some kind of, something to drink. But then nothing came up, he expected, but nothing happened. So he thought maybe, okay, there is nothing to drink or anything in the evening, but maybe I will get a good breakfast, okay. And then, well, in the morning time came, there was no breakfast either, okay. And then he thought, okay, in this Aranya, maybe they give a good midday meal then. But then towards the midday, his friend came and said, friend, we will go for Pindapata, So it looks like that, any meals are not coming, so you have to go for Pindapata. Then, the friend said, okay, then both went for Pindapata and collected something and ate. And then they were sitting under a tree and, talking. Then the monk from village said that, my friend, in the Aranya, you are living a very difficult life. You are living very difficult life. So why don't you come to village with me? In the village, my temple life is much more comfortable. You get a breakfast, and then you get something to drink in the evening, and also you get people bringing midday meal. So why don't you come with me? And then he said, yes, sure, we will go. Now this Aranya monk is ready to go with him. Then the village monk asked, don't you want to go back and lock your room or something and stuff? No, there is nothing. That's okay, we will go. But then village monk said, no, but I have to go back because I left my walking stick and something. So ultimately, the whole thing is distinction between living village and living Aranya is ultimately depends on the people. Actually, I think I got the story wrong because the Aranya monk was, I think, visiting village perhaps. Anyhow, I mix up the story. But the whole issue is this: whether you live in Aranya or whether you live in village, but ultimately it depends on what the kind of person you are. Okay. In this story, actually, it is the Aranya monk who could not leave right away because, I got the story wrong. The Aranya monk was visiting village really. In the Aranya, it was very good life because a lot of people come and, because you are Aranyavasi. To see that village life was much more simple. I'm sorry, I got the story wrong way, but the Aranya monk was visiting the village monk. And then the village monk is the one who said, okay, we will go to Aranya. But then he asked whether you don't have to anything to close down and, then he said, no, nothing, that's okay. To see that even though he lived in the village, he lived a very simple life. So anyhow, this story shows that, I think the story is very interesting because it shows that ultimately what really matters is not where you are living or what you are doing, actually who you are. A person can be village monk, but still in his practice and everything, mind set up, he can be a meditating monk. He may be in the whole daytime, he may be cleaning things and carrying things around and building a vihara, but still he can be a meditator. But the person who is supposed to be meditating whole day may not be a meditator. So these stories in the tradition, very interestingly, have been kept up because there is a meaning. Now, these are good topics for you folks to do research, Look at the Burmese society, how the society has evolved and, how these categories are being developed, So, like that. But so anyhow, when we look at the Buddhist tradition and these traditions, we can see that, some kind of distinction, karma marga and jnana marga. Some people are doing things physically. Some people are sitting and contemplating. But, ultimately, the sharp division was not made. But any religious tradition, you see that. You see it in Buddhism, you see it in Hinduism, and also you see it in Christianity and other religions. In Christianity also, there are parish priests and there are monks. There are parish priest is a person who goes around in the parish and looks after the people and do things. But there can be monks who are living in a more cloistered life. So when we look at all the major religions, you can see that this distinction is taking place. So at some point, of course, even for a monk to meditate in the Aranya, somebody has to look after the Aranya, right? So either some monk or some layperson or whoever has to do that work. Even for the Christian monk who is cloistered in a place and doesn't come to the society, but he has to eat, he has to have a roof. I mean, who is doing those things? Now, maybe those things are looked after by another priest. And then, do you want to say that one is going to hell and other is going to heaven? No. So, this is how, this whole distinction between karma marga and jnana marga. Although it is a Hindu idea, you can see this goes across all religions in different degrees. So, anyhow, the important thing is ultimately in Indian religion, Hinduism, we come to this stage of Adhyatma Vidya, internal knowledge, and then knowing your inner. So this meditation, contemplation, knowledge as the path, because the goal is really some kind of realization. Now at this point you can see that the Atman Brahman realization is the goal, not the heaven. Okay? So Atman Brahman realization requires for you to have knowledge. So now this is very similar in Buddhism too, but I am not going to discuss too much Buddhism in this class. But again, Samma Jnana, Samma Vimutti says that it is ultimately through knowledge you get liberation. So when you have the goal to be moksha, liberation from your sansaric existence, so the path is the jnana, knowledge. And then when we next discuss Christianity and God-centered religions, you can see that path is different, and according to the path also the goal is, the goal is different, and according to the goal, path is also different. Okay. All right. So what I said so far 2 points. One thing is when you look at the early primitive religion, goals are pretty simple, and also what they did to achieve that was also pretty simple. But then subsequently in the Vedic tradition in India, yajna, sacrifice, developed as a very, very elaborate, complex religious activity. However, within that tradition itself, we have the Aranyaka literature aspect and the Upanishad literature aspect, where contemplative tradition was developed, because ultimately the moksha or liberation was conceived or understood to be something comes through inner development and through knowledge. Okay. Before proceeding further, we can have, do you have any questions or comments about, yes, sir.
I would like to know what is the means of out of samsara to Hinduism. Is similar to Buddhism?
Say it again.